He came in on a Tuesday in November with 40 pounds of cod and a cut across his palm that he hadn't bothered to mention to anyone, and I knew before he made it up the dock that he was going to be trouble, the good kind, the kind you don't recover from. My name is Rafferty Sloane. I keep the light at Graves Ledge, which sits 4.5 miles offshore in Boston Harbor and is, by most accounts, the loneliest posting in the Massachusetts Lighthouse system. This does not bother me. I am 35 years old. I grew up in Gloucester, and I have a specific relationship with solitude that most people misread as unhappiness. It isn't. It's more like a preference for signal over noise. The ocean provides signal constantly. Most of what passes for conversation on land is noise. I made my peace with this distinction around age 22 and have not revisited it. The light sits on a granite ledge that covers at high tide and leaves maybe 30 yards of rock at low. The tower is 41 feet. I do 2-week rotations, 2 weeks on, 5 days off. And in the off weeks, I stay in a rented room in East Boston because I cannot entirely afford to be away from the water. The harbor in November is not comfortable. It is gray and direct and honest about what it is, which is cold and old and not particularly interested in your feelings about it. The fishing boat that came in on that Tuesday was the Ingrid Ray, a 42-foot lobster and groundfish vessel out of Scituate, working the harbor approaches. I was on my off rotation, standing on the dock at Constitution Wharf for reasons I could not have explained, watching the boats come in the way I always watch boats come in, not waiting for anything specific, just watching, when the Ingrid Ray tied up and her captain came over the rail. His name was Cormac Duffy. He was 38, built like the Atlantic had assembled him personally, with the particular stillness of men who work alone in weather. He had a wool cap pushed back on his head, a fillet knife on his belt, and a cut across his left palm wrapped in what appeared to be a strip of his own shirt. He walked past me twice before he stopped. "You're the Graves keeper," he said. "Not a question. Rafferty Sloane," I said. "Cormac Duffy." He looked at his hand. "You wouldn't have a kid on you." "I have one on the boat," I said. "Come on." Here's what you need to understand about a man who wraps his own wound with his shirt and keeps working. He sat on a cleat at the end of the dock while I cleaned the cut, which was deep enough to need closing, but not deep enough to need a hospital. And he held his hand out with the flat patience of someone who has been injured before and understands that the fastest path through it is to stay still and let the person working do their work. "Fillet knife," he said. "I know what a fillet knife cut looks like," I said. "Course you do." He watched my hands. "You do this often? First aid on the dock?" "I keep a lighthouse," I said. "You prepare for what's available." He was quiet while I closed the cut with butterfly strips. His hand was steady. The wind off the harbor was the November kind, not vicious, just committed, the kind that has decided what it is and isn't going to argue about it. When I finished, he looked at it, flexed his fingers once, testing. "Clean work," he said. "It'll hold if you don't do anything stupid with it for 48 hours. "Define stupid." "Hauling traps," I said. He looked at me. First real look, direct, brief, the New England version of an assessment, which is to say thorough and expressed in approximately 1 second. "I'll manage," he said. "You always do," I said. "That's not the same as it being a good idea." He almost smiled. It happened in the left corner of his mouth and was gone before it fully arrived, but I saw it, and I filed it in the same place I file things I intend to come back to. He stood. Tested his weight, not his hand, his whole body, the way men who work physical jobs check themselves after an injury, an inventory. "I owe you," he said. "You don't," I said. "I do," he said. "That's how it works." He said it the way you state a fact about tide tables. Not negotiable, not sentimental, just the structure of things as he understood them, stated plainly. I let him keep it. Wait, don't skip this part, because this is where the harbor gets small. I was back at Graves 3 days later when the Ingrid Ray came within a half-mile of the ledge on her way out to the winter grounds. This was not unusual. The Ingrid Ray worked these waters regularly. What was unusual was that she slowed to near idle as she passed the light, and the man on the bridge, visible at this distance as a shape in a wool cap, raised one hand. I was at the lightroom railing. I raised mine back. She moved on. I watched her go until she was a shape, and then a suggestion, and then nothing. I went inside and wrote the log entry for the morning, and did not write anything about the Ingrid Ray slowing near the ledge, because it wasn't relevant to the operational record. But I thought about it for the rest of the watch, which was 8 hours, and the thinking was not unpleasant. He came back to Constitution Wharf the following Tuesday. Different day, different catch. Haddock this time, late season. The harbor approach still giving up fish if you knew where to look. I was there because I was always there on Tuesdays in November, had been for 3 years, had never examined why. He saw me from the rail before he was tied up. "Sloane," he said. "Duffy," I said. He came over the rail. His hand was wrapped clean, proper bandage this time, not his shirt. He saw me see it. "Held," he said. "Told you." I said, "You did." He tied off the stern line with the automatic efficiency of someone who has done it 10,000 times. "You eat fish?" "I keep a lighthouse," I said. "What do you think?" "Come on, then." Here's the part that nobody who hasn't worked the water will understand. He filleted 3 haddock on the dock in 11 minutes. I have watched a lot of people fillet fish. I have done it myself, competently, since I was 14. What Cormac did was not the same category of activity. It was the kind of work that is so fully absorbed into muscle memory that the hands move without participation from the mind, and the mind is therefore free to do other things, and the other thing his mind was doing was talking to me. We talked about the harbor, about the winter grounds, and where the fish were moving, and what the bottom temperatures were doing. About the Ingrid Ray. He'd inherited her from his uncle, kept her running with a rotating crew of 1 or 2 depending on the season, had turned down twice the money to sell her because she was paid off and honest, and he didn't see the logic in trading honesty for more. More what? I said. More everything, he said. More boat, more debt, more crew, more problems. He didn't look up from the knife. I have what I need. Most people want more than what they need, I said. I know, he said. I'm not most people. The knife moved. The fish came apart in clean sections. The harbor light was flat and gray and honest, and the gulls maintained their professional distance, watching. "What made you take the Graves posting?" he said. "Same reason," I said. He looked up. Here's what I didn't let myself think about, until I couldn't help it. The thing about a lighthouse rotation is that you have a great deal of time to think. This is both the point and the hazard of it. You watch the light, you log the weather, you manage the equipment, and in the spaces between, which are long in November, when the dark comes early and the harbor is empty of everything but working boats and weather, you think. I thought about Cormac Duffy more than I logged, more than was operationally relevant. I thought about the way he worked, the economy of it, the lack of exhibition, and about the way he'd said, "I have what I need," like it was a position he'd arrived at through consideration rather than one he'd been assigned. I thought about the left corner of his mouth. I thought about the Ingrid Ray slowing near the ledge and the hand raised from the bridge. On my next off-rotation, I was at Constitution Wharf on Tuesday morning, before the boats were in. This was not unusual. Nobody needed to know why. The Ingrid Ray came in at 8:30. Cormac came over the rail and looked at me and said, "Coffee first." It wasn't a question. "Coffee first," I agreed. "It's paid off and honest," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. The knife was still. The gulls waited. "Yeah," he said. "All right." He went back to the knife. I watched his hands. Don't miss this, because this is where 2 people stop pretending. The place he took me was a counter diner 2 blocks from the wharf, the kind of Boston diner that has been the same since 1987 and plans to remain so, with coffee in ceramic mugs and a menu on a chalkboard, and a woman behind the counter named Paulette who knew Cormac's order before he sat down and looked at me with the frank assessment of someone whose job requires her to evaluate strangers quickly and accurately. "Friend of yours," she said to Cormac, setting down his coffee. "Working on it," Cormac said. Paulette looked at me again, put down a second mug, went away. We drank the coffee. Outside the window, the November street was gray and direct. People moving fast the way Boston people move in cold weather. Not rushed, just efficient. The city's general relationship with discomfort applied to temperature. "You grew up in Gloucester," he said. "It wasn't a question. You know that." "I looked you up," he said. "No apology. Straight fact." "What did you find?" "Gloucester. Coast Guard Auxiliary, 4 years. Graves Ledge, 3 years. Before that, Merchant Marine, 2 years. He turned his coffee cup once on the counter. "You've been at sea your whole adult life." "So have you," I said. "Different kind of sea," he said. "I go out and come back. You stay." "I come back," I said, "every 5 days." "That's not what I mean." I looked at him. He was looking at the window, the gray street, the gray sky, the city moving fast through the cold. "What do you mean?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. The diner had its sounds, the counter, the coffee, Paulette's conversation with someone at the far end. "I mean you're comfortable in the alone," he said. "More comfortable than most. And I've been watching you on that dock for 3 weeks," he said. "And you're comfortable with me too." He looked at me then. Direct. The 1-second New England assessment, extended. "That's not nothing." I held the eye contact. "No," I said. "It's not." He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. "I'm not complicated," he said. "I want you to know that. I've been complicated before, and it cost me more than it was worth, and I'm not interested in it anymore. What I am is," he paused, "straightforward. If I'm in, I'm in. If I'm not, I say so." "And right now," I said. He looked at me. "Right now I'm drinking coffee with you," he said. "And I'd like to do it again. And I'd like to do more than that eventually. And I'm telling you that plainly because I'm 38 years old and life is short and the harbor is cold and I don't see the point in the other way." The diner counter. The ceramic mugs. Paulette pretending not to listen from the far end. I put my hand on the counter between us, not reaching for his. Just there. Present. Visible. A statement without words. He looked at it. Then he put his hand over mine. His palm was warm and rough and certain, and he didn't make it a moment. He just did it, the way he tied off the stern line. Automatic, clean, 10,000 times. Except this was the first time. Here's what the harbor looks like from 41 feet up on a December night, and why it matters. He came out to Graves on a Saturday in December. This required coordination. The tender that serviced the light ran twice weekly, and getting a passenger berth required paperwork I expedited through channels I'd rather not specify. But he came, and he stood on the granite ledge in the December wind with his hands in his jacket and looked at the harbor the way I looked at it every day, like it was information. "You can see the approach lanes from here," he said. "All of them," I said. "I've come through that lane," he pointed northeast, "probably 400 times. "I know," I said. "I've logged the Ingrid Ray every time she's been in range." He looked at me. "You log every vessel," I said. "It's the job." "But you recognized her." "I recognized her," I said. He was quiet. The wind moved between us and around us, and the light above made its rotation, every 4 seconds, the characteristic flash of Graves Ledge, the same sequence it had made for 120 years. "What's it like?" he said. "The rotation. When you're up here alone." "Honest," I said. "Everything is exactly what it is, no more." He looked at the harbor. The Boston skyline was aglow to the west, smeared orange above the dark water. Planes descended into Logan in a slow diagonal, their lights blinking patient and regular. "That's what it's like on the boat," he said, "when it's just me and the water." "I know," I said. He turned. We were close. The ledge was not large. The wind kept pushing us toward each other, or we let it, which is not the same thing, but in practice produces the same result. His face in the light of the tower was angular and specific, the cold having stripped everything down to the actual topography of it. He reached out and turned my collar up against the wind. Both hands deliberate, adjusting the lapels of my jacket with the same economy he brought to everything. Functional first, but his fingers stayed at my collar a moment after the function was served. Resting there, not pressing, just present. I looked at him. "Cold," he said. By way of explanation, very, I said. His hands were still at my collar. Mine came up and covered them, both of them, my hands over his. And we stood like that on the granite ledge in the December wind, with the light making its 4-second rotation above us, and Boston glowing to the west, and the harbor between us and everything else. You okay? I said. I keep being, he said, like he'd known the words a long time, like they were already his. Me too, I said. He leaned in and pressed his forehead to mine. The wind moved. The light turned. His hands were warm under mine at my collar, and the granite was cold underfoot, and the harbor was doing what the harbor does in December, being exactly, uncomplicatedly, permanently itself. We stood there for a long time. Neither of us was cold. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. Outside, Boston moved through the cold. What the Graves Ledge Lighthouse logbook recorded on Saturday, December 14th. 0600, light functioning. Weather, overcast. Wind NNW 18 knots. Visibility 6 nautical miles. Sea state, moderate. 0900, tender arrival, 1 passenger aboard. 1200, weather holding. Wind 15 knots. Visibility unchanged. 1800, light functioning. Sunset 16. 11. Passenger overnight, per operational accommodation. 2200, light functioning. Wind 12 knots. Visibility good. Harbor traffic normal. The log entry for Saturday, December 14th was 3 lines longer than the standard entry. The additional lines contained no deviation from operational record. They documented, accurately, the weather, the visibility, the sea state, and the function of the light. They did not document what happened on the granite ledge at 1847, when the last of the light left the harbor and the tower began its rotation, and 2 men stood in the wind with their hands over each other's hands and their foreheads together, and the Atlantic moving beneath them in the dark. Some things belong to the log. Some things belong to the men who keep it. The lighthouse kept the light. That was always enough. One more thing, before you go. If this story meant something to you, if you've been here for the red line, the mountain ridge, the highway at midnight, the fire tower, or this granite ledge, there are a few ways to help keep these stories coming. A like takes 2 seconds and tells the algorithm this work is worth sharing. A subscription means you'll be here for the next one. If you want to go further, channel memberships in the store are both open. Every bit of support goes directly into the next story, the next voice, the next 2 men finding each other in the places where the world gets quiet enough to hear something real. And if you've already done any of that, thank you. You're the reason the light stays on. New story every week, same harbor,